let's talk about one of our players that are actually on the roster right now, and that's none other than our starting signal caller in the for the 2024 season, Cade Klubnik. He was at the Elite 11 this past weekend as a college counselor. I did want to talk about this a little bit because actually I was listening to Josh Pate. He does the Late Kick show over for 24/7 Sports, but he also does a Late Kick Extra podcast that's podcast only, so it doesn't show up on their YouTube channel or anything like that. Where it's basically just a mailbag episode, and he had mentioned he was answering a question about Clemson and what the conversation would be about them if they won the national championship this year. And he talked about how he was at the Elite 11 finals and watched Cade Klubnik throw, and he looked really, really, really good. So I did want to talk about this because there does seem to be a disconnect as far as kind of, and I think just within the fan base about how good Cade actually is. There's some in how talented he actually is, because I feel like I think when people get into their criticisms of Cade and what he struggled with last year, I think they take it to the point where they kind of discredit his actual physical talent and ability.
Yes, yeah.
And which obviously is not the case. And I saw somebody say that Cade is a extremely inaccurate quarterback, and I was like, well, no, that's not true. They kind of just find any sort of criticism, any sort of thing that they've heard before about any given quarterback, and they just kind of attribute it to Cade. It's like, oh man, he's inaccurate. He has a weak arm, or he can't do this, can't do that. Footwork, and some of it's true, but some of it's like they're just looking for things to say about why Cade is or isn't good. So I did want to talk about this because I do think there is some kind of disconnect within the fan base about what Cade is and what he was last year, what he is currently, and what he can be this year. I think those are three different conversations.
I think, look,
it's kind of been blended into one. It's almost like, guys can't improve and players can't get better.
Absolutely. Which is why I think me and you have made not a huge deal, but we have made clear that it is exciting to see him putting work in this offseason, right? He's out working with Jordan Palmer. He's got Antonio Williams out there with them. He's got Jake Brenningstool, two of his, what you would assume to be his main weapons this upcoming season, right? So he's working there. He's a counselor at the Elite 11 camp. He's working with younger guys there. He's there throwing. And I think one of the things to remember with Cade is, yes, is it true, or is some of the criticism that he has received since being a quarterback at Clemson fair? Absolutely. His decision making has left some to be desired, right? Needs improvement for sure. He needs to be able to move through progressions quicker, make quicker decisions, read defenses a little bit quicker at the line of scrimmage, right pre-snap, not lock in on one guy. But arm talent, Cade Klubnik's got arm talent. Athleticism, Cade Klubnik's got athleticism. Accuracy, Cade Klubnik's got accuracy, right? I would encourage people to remember who Cade Klubnik was when he was recruited, right? This is a guy that performed massively at the highest levels of Texas football. This guy wasn't playing in some podunk town in the middle of nowhere in small town USA, right? This dude was playing major high school football in Texas, where it's like almost a religion down there, right? And he was playing for a well-known school like Westlake, right, and led them to multiple championships. And you saw his athleticism, you saw his decision making, you saw his ability to rise to the occasion in the biggest moments. Now, that hasn't necessarily translated to the college game yet, but you got to understand that it's there. His ability is still there. He's got to put it all together, right? Let's remember that this is going to now be year 2 of the Garrett Riley system, right? We finally went through an offseason where we had adequate scholarship wide receivers available for him to work with throughout spring and throughout the summer. They're obviously out places. They're throwing together. They're having set sessions together. They're building that chemistry. So just remember that Cade Klubnik has the ability to turn it around, right? It would not surprise me for Cade Klubnik to come out this season and look like a different quarterback. I'm not saying he's going to go out there and throw for, 4,500, 5,000 yards. I'm not saying that at all. But Cade Klubnik has the ability to do that. He does with the proper help around him. And if his decision making gets better and all of that stuff, and I know that's a lot of ifs, but to say that he doesn't have the talent to turn this around or the ability is just, it's not true.
Yeah.
He hasn't done it to this point, but that doesn't mean he can't do it, right? There's a lot of growth that needs to happen there, and I think that Cade Klubnik would be the first to tell you that he's got a lot of growing to do. But I think he's also a guy that takes personal accountability and personal responsibility for his play on the field. And he understands that last season it wasn't good enough. I think he'd be the first to tell you it wasn't good enough. And I'd be willing to bet that he would tell you he's not satisfied with it, right? Which is why he's out there working and trying to get better. So I think he's a much better quarterback than people realize. We just got to see it on the field. It's got to come all together, and I think it's going to help because of all the things I listed, right? Year 2 under Garrett Riley. Garrett Riley's becoming, a little bit more comfortable with the personnel that he has. The wide receiver room, we've gone over it a couple times this offseason, Jordan. I know a lot of people don't know none of the names, but there's a ton of talent, and it's deep in that wide receiver room, right? We got Matt Luke as the new offensive line coach, right? I know a lot of people don't know this too, but there's a ton of talent along that offensive line as well, right? And now you have a coach there that can absolutely develop them into what their star rating said they were when they committed to Clemson, right? So there's a lot of pieces, I think, coming together. We just got to, hope that it can all come together this season. But Cade Klubnik is absolutely a guy that is more than talented enough to be a really, really good quarterback for the Clemson Tigers.
Yeah, and you basically hit on it. I mean, it's always been. I think it's always been up here for Cade, and that's what it was last year. I think a lot. I mean, I think at times, especially when you talk about what happened when DJ was the quarterback. I mean, there was a lot of mental issues too. That he had to work through, but also we had to talk about how mechanics were kind of off, and he had to change those. He would sail a lot of throws. Like Cade didn't really do that a ton. Actually, some of Cade's best throws last year weren't caught, and that was kind of the frustrating thing at times. I do think the drop issues that we've seen with the receivers has gotten, was better last season, but it was still a problem at times. And I think some of his best throws last year weren't caught. I think about that throw, really the first game of the year against Duke, where he's throwing on the run. I wish I could pull up the clip right now. But he's throwing on the run. I think it's like a drag or something. I don't remember what receiver he was throwing to, but he threw off one leg. It was kind of a sidearm throw, and it was a perfectly placed ball that just hit off the receiver's chest. It was stuff like that, and it was a cross hash throw too, like an extremely difficult throw. And I think when people talk about arm talent, they always they mistakenly think of arm strength. Now, I think that's a part of arm talent for sure. Like being able to throw the ball really far is is part of your arm talent. But when quarterback coaches and evaluators of the quarterback position, talk about arm talent, it's about being able, how well can you layer your throws? How well can you, how much touch can you put on it?
Right.
How much, the spin rate, there's all sorts of stuff that you can get into with, what actually makes a talented quarterback talented. And it's not just arm strength. And so I think when people talk about Cade and it's like he doesn't have like the elite arm strength that DJ had, they'll say it's like, oh, he has a weak arm. And that's not true. He's gotten I would say he has an above average arm. He can make pretty much any throw that's within reason, like that you need him to make. Like he can make any throw, especially within Garrett Riley's system. Like he can make those throws. The problem with him last year was he just has to he has to do a better job of giving them a chance. Sometimes it was, he tried to put too much, arc on it at times. Sometimes it wasn't, he didn't put enough. It's about finding that, that internal like kind of feel when you're making those throws down the field. So it's never. I don't think it's an arm strength issue for Cade. It's not an arm talent issue for Cade. Like I said, it's all been up here. I think it's up here from going through progressions. The timing at times was just not where it needed to be. Throws were a little bit late, and it was the difference between a catch and an incompletion or an interception at times. So that just. I wanted to discuss this because you ask any one Clemson fan like what they feel about Cade Klubnik, like how good is Cade Klubnik, and you might get like 5 different answers. And they all say something different. So I wanted to kind of discuss that for a little bit, and just the Elite 11 stuff was just kind of reminded me of how good he actually is, and from a talent standpoint. I mean, he was the Elite 11 MVP. Now, that doesn't mean everything. There have been some Elite 11 MVPs that didn't pan out, but
100% there has. But physically,
the story hasn't been written on Cade, and I do.
Cade's story at Clemson is far from over. Physically, it's all there. Physically, Cade Klubnik is the guy you need him to be. And you're right, Jordan. To your point, it's the mental stuff. It's the reads. It's the the check calls at the line. It's the making those split second quick decisions. It's looking how those safeties are lined up and what's going to be open and what route's going to be best for that particular play and that particular coverage, right? And the alignment that you're in, right? That is the stuff that Cade has to improve on this offseason. The physical stuff, man, it's there. It always has been there. He is physically gifted as a quarterback. And I know some people probably out there is like, I don't believe that, but he is. He just is. He's athletic. He can make plays on the run. He's got, like you say, an above average arm. He can make all the throws necessary that he would be asked to do as a Clemson quarterback, right? So there's no worries there. That he can't make a throw that they need him to make. He can make all the throws, right? He's just got to be more confident in what he's seen, more confident in the offense, and more confident in the guys around him. And I don't think people realize how much of continuity and chemistry go into an offense, especially an offense like Garrett Riley, where there's so many motions and they're moving and they're, he's really scheming guys open and there's some option routes and things like that happen. And without chemistry, that stuff becomes really difficult to do. And I think there'll be a lot more chemistry. There'll be a lot more cohesion just as an overall offense this year. With Matt Luke taking over the offensive line, I think those guys are only going to get better. I'm not saying they're going from where they were last year to, top 5 offensive line in college football. I'm not saying that at all, but I think they will get significantly better, right? I think they will act as a more cohesive offensive line, and I don't think we'll see quite the musical chairs, which will help Cade out, right? He'll be more comfortable with his protection, because it's going to be the same game in and game out, right? Whereas last year, you got to kind of worry here and there. And believe it or not, that's in a quarterback's mind. How many times did Cade Klubnik get sacked last year? Like, what was it, like 20,
28.
28 times?
Yeah.
I mean, that's in a quarterback's mind. It always speeds him up. So now he's not going through his progressions like he should. He's just locking on one guy, and, you kind of get some of the results that you got last year. Not that he doesn't shoulder some of that blame, but some of that also goes on the offensive line, right? Some of that goes on the wide receiver and the in and out, the injuries that were there last year, and some of the drop balls, some of the poor route running that was there last year, some of the giving up on routes that we saw at times last year, and then same with Cade. There were wide receivers running wide open that he was just not seeing, right? So there's a lot of reasons that Clemson's offense looked the way it did last year. I think it wasn't all Cade; it was a lot on Cade. But to your point, Jordan, the physical aspects of Cade's game are there. They're 100% there. You're right. The story's not written on Cade. There's plenty more to come. And, as Clemson fans, you got to believe that he's going to turn it around. And by the time that, it's a curtain call for his career at Clemson, that it's going to look, the narrative and the story behind Cade Klubnik is going to be that he persevered. He kept working. He kept his head down. He turned it around. And he became a pretty good quarterback for the Tigers, right? That's what you got to hope if you're a Clemson fan, right? Because you've seen what's behind him. We need Cade Klubnik to step up and be that guy.
Yeah, absolutely. I had a friend of mine. He might be listening. He put it this way, and I thought it was pretty funny. We were talking about the spring game and kind of the difference between what we saw from Cade and what we saw from Trent Pierman, and he was like, Trent looks like he knows where he's going with the football before it's even snapped. And so it was like if we put Trent Pierman's brain in Cade's body, we go 12-0. I thought that was kind of funny because I do think it's like I do think the difference when you watch them, I think that was kind of the separate, because Trent Pierman does not have nearly the arm talent that Cade does. He just doesn't. He's not a very physically gifted thrower of the football, but it seemed like his understanding of the offense and what he was looking at this, pre-snap. I think that's kind of the biggest thing. And that's a lot of what, Garrett Riley's system is. I mean, a lot of it is creating matchups, before the ball is even snapped. And it's like you want Cade to get to the point where he's like, he gets a look and he's like, oh, this is going to be a touchdown. I know where.
Right. Yeah, absolutely.
You have, I don't even know an example, but like he looks at whatever he's looking at and he immediately sees, he knows where he's going with the football. And he's like, okay, if this isn't there, then this, and it's a very quick process. Like when quarterbacks, like, it's not even like they sit there and look at the defense and, run down the play clock. Like, the best quarterbacks are able to, get a look and just immediately they kind of have that plan in place, and they know exactly what what they're expecting and what to do if they don't get what they're expecting, because obviously defenses disguise what they're doing all the time. So that's where you hope Cade gets to by the end of his career, and if he gets there, then I do think Clemson will win a lot of football games, because I do think everything else around him is there. I do think this is a talented wide receiver room. I do think that you have a capable stable of running backs, and especially with Phil Mafah coming back.
Oh yeah,
you have a very deep tight end room and a talented tight end room. The offensive line, you have the talent there, and I believe you now have the coaching to match that talent.
Yes.
Of course, we'll have to see that, but there's like we've said, countless times throughout this offseason, there are a lot of reasons to buy into what Clemson has offensively and what Cade could potentially be in 2024.